You mentioned near the beginning of your speech about how some countries involved in the Olympics have sort of human rights offences within them, such as Iran not allowing women to swim in normal swimming costumes and that sort of thing. I'm just wondering, do you think those countries should be excluded from the Olympics? And if you do, how do you think that sort of thing should be enforced? And do you think it would be practical?
Well, I think the issue is, if the individual women athletes want to cover up, that's their right and their choice. What I object to is governments, any government, dictating that they must cover up. And that does go against Olympic principles, because the Olympic Charter's principles are about non-discrimination. If men don't have to cover up, and male arena athletes do not have to cover up, then there should not be any such restrictions on women.
Thinking, as a campaigner, you're obviously someone who enforces a view, and I'm just thinking, in relation to women in Saudi Arabia, a lot of the men in Saudi Arabia might put across the argument that sort of female swimmers, for example, over here are indecent and going against sort of various religious principles, or they would feel that that was wrong. How do you overcome that when you can't actually prove objectively that your view is the right one? It might just be a different one.
Well, I think the issue is, are these rules applied to men and women equally, or are they applied to only women? So if, for example, an individual woman decides that she wanted to dress modestly, and that she wanted to have, instead of a brief swimsuit, one that covered her entire body from the feet to the neck. If that's her choice, that's within the Olympic rules, and I would totally accept it. But what I'm saying is I object to the fact that a government is trying to impose its particular narrow, in this case religious or cultural interpretation, on a woman against her wishes. That's against the Olympic spirit. And we do have to stand for the principle, I believe, of universal human rights. We cannot say that just because people happen to live in the Middle East or Africa or Asia or wherever, that they are not entitled to human rights. Human rights are not just for white European people, they're for everybody on this planet. And the international human rights conventions that existed were drawn up by people from every continent on the planet. Every continent on the planet, and every country that belongs to the United Nations has signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and promised to uphold it. Every country that belongs to the Olympic movement has signed the Olympic Charter and pledged to uphold it. We cannot continue to allow get-out clauses that discriminate against particular individuals or hold classes of people on the basis of their gender, their ethnicity, their religion, or any other aspect of their lives.
You mentioned non-violence, and I was just wondering, would you always say that you should never campaign with violence? And if yes, then what about the fact that the suffragettes were violent and the movement in South Africa was violent, and the Palestinians are being attacked? Should they also just not use violence? I'm just wondering what you feel about that.
There are some people who argue that the ends justify the means. That if you're fighting for a noble cause against injustice, that you can use ignoble and unjust methods. I don't agree with that. I think the methods you use have to be consistent with the goal that you aspire to. There needs to be, a consistency between the methods and the goal. So I would say that particularly in broadly democratic nations, I wouldn't say that Britain is a perfect democracy at all, given that we have an unelected second chamber, but nevertheless, in broadly democratic countries, it's particularly wrong to use violence. And the reasoning is because once you use violent tactics, often the issue becomes the violence, not the reason why you're protesting. So, for example, there have been a succession of protests on a range of issues over the years where the whole media attention and the debates in Parliament have all been around the violence used by the protesters, not the often right cause, just cause, that they were pursuing. So I think that's a basic principle. I can see that there are certain exceptional situations where violence may be justified. For example, faced with Nazi Germany, I think we didn't have any option but to go to war and fight to defeat fascism. And those people in Germany, Jews, communists and others, who violently protested against the Nazi regime by assassinating Nazi officials, again, although I don't agree with violence, I think that was probably the lesser of two evils. I've often been asked in little news quiz type questions, if you could go back in time, where would you go and what would you do? And on more than once I've said January the 30th, 1933. Sorry, January the 20th, 1933. On that evening, Hitler went unguarded for dinner at the house of von Ribbentrop, and he walked unescorted through the garden. If I or someone had been there, he could have easily been assassinated. He would then have not become Chancellor, and the course of German history and indeed world history may have been very different. Now, if I'd been in that situation, I don't know whether I would have had the guts to do it. But I would have known that I wouldn't have liked doing it, but for the sake of preventing an even greater evil, the Holocaust and the Second World War, probably that violent act would have been morally justified. Well, I have to go. So thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure speaking to you. I wish you well. If you want to find out more about my campaigns, please go to my website, petertatchell.net. And if you're interested, you can subscribe for free to my campaign bulletins and get involved. So petertatchell.net. Very good wishes and have a great Parliament.